Many Christians worship on Sunday, but the biblical Sabbath is the seventh day. So who changed it? Did Jesus change it? Did the apostles change it? Or as many people have been taught, did Constantine change Christian worship from Saturday to Sunday in the fourth century? Here's where the investigation gets very interesting. Christians were already gathering on Sunday long before Constantine was born. But that does not mean the apostles explicitly transferred the Sabbath to Sunday. Those are two very different claims. So today we are putting one of Christianity's most controversial historical questions on trial. When did Christians start worshiping on Sunday? And more importantly, who actually changed what? Listen, my name is Reginald Delman Thompson, convergence leader and theological educator. And for nearly 30 years, I've committed myself to biblical study, apostolic infrastructure, church history, and exegetical teaching rooted in scripture. Welcome. I want to welcome each and every last one of you to another biblical investigation. This investigation is not designed to attack Christians who worship on Saturday or Christians who worship on Sunday. We're asking a historical and biblical question, and we must distinguish three things that are often blended together: Sunday worship, Sunday as a civil day of rest, and Saturday functioning like the biblical Sabbath. Those three developments did not necessarily happen at the same time. Scripture will speak first. History will provide context, and the evidence must earn the verdict. Let's call our first witness. And so we ask ourselves, what day is the biblical Sabbath? Okay, we must ask that question. That's what we're going to investigate on stand right now at this moment. Before we investigate Sunday, we must establish Saturday. Exodus 20 is explicit. God commands Israel to remember the Sabbath day and says the Sabbath day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. Biblically, the Sabbath is the seventh day. That point is not controversial. Jesus himself lived within that Sabbath tradition. He attended synagogue on the Sabbath. He taught on the Sabbath. He healed on the Sabbath. It wasn't agreed upon, but he did so. And when controversy actually arises concerning Sabbath observance, Jesus did not say the Sabbath day had ceased to be the Sabbath. Instead, he declared the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. So our first finding is secure. The Bible identifies the Sabbath day as the Sabbath. Nowhere does scripture suddenly redefine the seventh day itself as Sunday, which creates the obvious question: if the seventh day is the Sabbath, why are Christians gathering on the first day? Let's call our first witness to the stand. Did the apostles gather on Sundays? Let's call them to the stand. Now, we enter into the New Testament church, right? And the first thing we discover is that the resurrection changed the significance of the first day of the week. All four gospels place the discovery of the empty tomb after the Sabbath on the first day of the week. Jesus is risen, and the first day becomes permanently connected with the resurrection. Then Acts 20 and 7 records something significant. Upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread. There it is. We see that here. A Christian gathering on the first day. Paul also tells the Christians in the 1 Corinthians 16 and 2 to set something aside on the first day of the week for the collection he has organizing, that he was organizing at that moment. So the first day, Christian activity is unquestionably present in the New Testament, but now we must apply our investigation rule. Never ask a witness to say more than the witness actually says. So, Acts 20 tells us believers gather on the first day. It does not say the Sabbath has not been transferred to Sunday. 1 Corinthians 16 mentions first day preparation for an offering. It does not say Sunday is now the Christian Sabbath. Then we reach Revelation 1 and 10, where John says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Later, Christian writers clearly connect the Lord's day with Sunday, but Revelation itself does not stop and define the expression for us. That distinction actually matters. So, our second finding is very precise. The New Testament records Christian activity and gathering on the first day of the week, but it contains no explicit apostolic decree transferring the seventh day Sabbath to Sunday. That means we still have two possibilities. Perhaps Sunday worship developed much later, or perhaps Christians were already gathering on Sunday immediately after the apostolic period. And this is where the Constantine argument faces its first serious problem, because our next witnesses lived long before Constantine. So our third witness here, we have to ask, were Christians worshiping on Sunday before Constantine? The answer is yes. And this is where the historical evidence becomes difficult to ignore. One of our earliest witness is our Christian document known as the Didache. It comes from the early Christian period, generations before Constantine. The Didache instructs Christians concerning gathering on the Lord's day, breaking bread, giving thanks, and preparing themselves for worship. But an even stronger witness appears in the middle of the second century. His name is Justin Martyr, and Justin describes Christian worship in detail. He explores that Christians living in cities and in the countryside gathering together on Sunday. He tells us why first Christians associated the first day with creation, but more importantly, they associated Sunday with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, look at the timeline. Justin is writing in the second century. Constantine's famous Sunday legislation does not appear until AD 321. Understand that. That puts explicit Christian Sunday worship more than a century before Constantine's law. So one claim can now be removed from the courtroom. Constantine did not invent Christian Sunday worship. I say it again, Constantine did not invent Christian Sunday worship. The evidence is simply too early, but do not move too quickly, because this does not mean every Christian has stopped observing Sunday. And that is where this investigation becomes far more interesting than the usual arguments. And so, with that being said, let's call our next witness. Did early Christians worship on both Saturday and Sunday? This is where the investigation takes an unexpected turn here. If Christians were gathering on Sunday before Constantine, we might assume that Saturday disappeared. But history does not allow us to say that. Evidence from the early church shows us that in some regions, Christians gather together on the seventh day while also honoring the first day of the week. In other words, for some Christians, the development was not Saturday or Sunday. For a period of Christian history, it could be Saturday and Sunday. This distinction matters because Christianity began with Judaism. Jesus was Jewish. He was a Jew. The apostles were Jewish. The earliest believers in Jerusalem were Jewish. The Sabbath was already deeply embedded in their religious world. So when Christians began gathering on the first day in celebration of the resurrection, that did not necessarily mean every Christian immediately stopped recognizing the seventh day or the Sabbath day. Later Christian historians actually preserve evidence of both practices. Um, Socrates, Scholasticus, writing in the first century, observed that Christians in many places celebrated the sacred mystery on the Sabbath, while Christians in Rome and Alexandria followed a different custom. So there was no universal overnight transition. Different Christian communities developed differently. That gives us another finding. Sunday worship developed early, but Sabbath gathering did not disappear everywhere at the same time. And now we are finally ready to bring the man everybody has been waiting for into the courtroom. Constantine. Did Constantine change the Sabbath to Sunday? In AD 321, Emperor Constantine issued his famous Sunday legislation. And this is where we must be exceptionally precise. Constantine ordered judges, people living in cities, and workshops to rest on what the law called the venerable day of the sun. Agricultural work could continue when necessary. Now, listen carefully to what the law does not say. It does not say, I hereby change the Sabbath from from Saturday to Sunday. It does not say Christians must stop worshiping on Saturday. It does not say, from this point forward, Christians shall begin worshiping on Sunday. Why? Because Christians were already gathering on Sunday. Justin Martyr proves that more than a century earlier. Constantine did something important, but it was something different. He gave Sunday civil and legal prominence as a day of rest. He gave legal prominence as a day of rest. And there is our distinction because Christian Sunday worship existed before Constantine. Constantine later gave Sunday civil rest status. Those are two different historical developments. So when someone says Constantine created Sunday worship, what? Come on, man. Come on now. The historical evidence says no, he did not. But when someone says Constantine had obviously nothing to do with the later prominence on Sunday, the answer is also no. His legislation mattered. It strengthened Sunday's place within Roman public life. But Constantine entered a Christian world that was already gathering on Sunday. And that is where we discover something else. The person who supposedly changed the Sabbath may not actually be where the strongest evidence for that translation appears. For that, we have to look later in the 4th century. So then we ask for our next witness, when did Sunday begin functioning more like the Sabbath? Now we arrive at the distinction that changes the entire investigation. Christians worshiping on Sunday is one question. Christians resting on Sunday as they had traditionally rested on Sabbath is another. That distinction is often missed here. And several decades after Constantine, a regional church council met in Laodicea, in Canon 29 of the Council of Laodicea, some people say Laodicea, I say Laodicea, addressed Christians. So in Canon 29 of the Council of Laodicea addressed Christians who were resting on the Jewish Sabbath. The council instructed Christians not to Judaize, but resting on the Sabbath, but instead to work on that day and honor the Lord's day. Resting then, if possible, is what it was stating there. Now we have moved into something very different, if I will say. It isn't merely Christians worship on Sunday because Jesus rose from the dead. We now have ecclesiastical legislation discouraging Sabbath rest while directing greater honor and rest toward the Lord's day. That means Sunday gathering on Sunday Sabbath, like rest developed on different historical tracks before becoming increasingly connected here. That gives us one of the most important findings in the entire investigation. The evidence for transferring Sabbath like rest towards Sunday becomes much clearer in later 4th century church discipline than it does in the New Testament. I hope you're following along here. That does not mean Laodicea single handedly changed Christianity. It was a regional council, not a universal moment when every Christian everywhere suddenly changed practice. Again, history developed in stages, and this is why I'm saying here that Constantine changed. This is why people are saying that Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday. Um, compresses centuries of Christian development into one sentence, and we can't do that because the evidence simply does not support history being that simple. History is not that simple as you think it is. It doesn't come past that simple. So if we can move on to the next witness here, we have to ask, why Sunday? Why Sunday? And now that we have Constantine, now that we know actually that Constantine did not invent Sunday worship, um, we still need to answer the most important question. Why were Christians gathering on Sunday in the first place? The strongest historical answer points us back to Jesus. The gospel agreed that the empty tomb was discovered on the first day of the week. The resurrection gave the first day a uniquely Christian significance. And this is not something we have to guess from later theology. Justin Miter tells us why Christians in his time gather on Sunday. He connects Sunday with creation. He also explicitly connects it with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is significant because Justin is not writing after Constantine. He is describing Christian practice in the second century. Sunday was directly functioning as a day when Christians gathered around scripture, prayer, Eucharist worship, and the memory of the resurrection. So our evidence points towards this conclusion. Sunday became important to Christians primarily as a day associated with the resurrection, not because Constantine selected a day or ordered Christians to worship in it or on it. But we have to notice something here. What still um, has not been said. And so, what I would say, uh, we have not said Jesus changed the Sabbath to Sunday. We have not said the apostles changed the Sabbath to Sunday. We have not said Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday, because none of these statements accurately describes the entire historical development. Now, all of our witnesses have testified. It is time for the closing argument, if you agree. And so let's put the evidence in chronological order. That's very important. Put it in order. The biblical Sabbath is the seventh day. Jesus lived, taught, ministered within that Sabbath world. Jesus rose from the dead on the first day of the week, though. The New Testament records Christians gathering and conducting Christian activity on the first day. But the New Testament never gives us an explicit command saying the seventh day Sabbath has now been transferred to Sunday. Then we move beyond the New Testament. Early Christian writings um, show believers gathering on the Lord's day. By the middle of the second century, Justin Miter explicitly tells us Christians were assembling on Sunday. That is long before Constantine, is what I'm trying to tell you. Historical evidence also shows us that Sabbath gatherings continue among Christians in some regions. So Sunday did not simply erase Saturday overnight. Then Constantine arrives in AD 321. He gives Sunday civil rest status within the Roman Empire. Important. It's very important. It's absolutely important. The beginning of Christian Sunday worship is important. It's very important because he gives Sunday civil rest status within the Roman Empire. Is that important? I'm going to ask you again. That's very important. The beginning of Christian Sunday worship. So we gotta look at this the way it is, the historical chronological order. And then later, if we can move on, in the fourth century, the Council of Laodicea gives us clearer evidence of ecclesiastical pressure against Sabbath rest while encouraging Christians to honor and, if possible, rest on the Lord's day. Now we can finally see the development. Sabbath, the resurrection, first day gathering, Sunday worship, continuous Sabbath gathering in some regions, imperial Sunday rest legislation, later ecclesiastical movement towards Sunday rest. This did not happen through one person. It did not happen through one council. And it did not happen in 1 year. It happened in stages. History happens in stages. So let's get the verdict. So when did Christians start worshiping on Sunday? The evidence takes us far earlier than Constantine. The New Testament already records first day Christian gatherings, and by the second century, we possess unmistakable historical evidence that Christians were assembling on Sunday in connection with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But if the question is, where did the Sabbath officially become Sunday? We have a problem because the New Testament never records apostolic decrees transferring the seventh day Sabbath to the first day. And history does not reveal one single moment when everybody changed. Instead, Sunday worship developed early. Sabbath observance continue among some Christians. Constantine later gave Sunday civil rest status, and later fourth century church legislation increasingly moved Christian practice away from Sabbath rest towards the Lord's day rest. So, did Constantine change the Sabbath to Sunday? No, not in the simplest way um, that claim has been presented. He did not invent Sunday worship. He did not introduce Christians to Sunday. He did not issue the first Christian command to worship on Sunday, but his legislation contributed significantly to Sunday becoming a legal recognized day of rest within Roman society. Here's the verdict: Constantine did not create Sunday worship. He entered a Christian world that was already worshiping on Sunday. But there is another half to that verdict. Sunday worship and Sunday replacing Sabbath rest are not the same historical questions. I will say it again, and I want you to hear what I'm saying. Sunday worship and Saturday worship and Saturday replacing Sabbath rest are not the historical question. It's not the same historical question. Once we separate those two things, much of the controversy becomes easier to understand. Again, Sunday worship and Sunday replacing Sabbath rest are not the same historical question. Now, maybe you worship on Sunday. Maybe you worship on Saturday. Maybe you grew up being told that Constantine changed the Sabbath. Maybe you were taught that the apostles simply moved the Sabbath to Sunday immediately after the resurrection. Whatever tradition you come from, my responsibility is the same. Let the evidence speak. Scripture identifies the seventh day as the Sabbath. Scripture also records the first day Christian activity. History documents Sunday Christian worship long before Constantine. History also documents continued Sabbath gatherings among sane Christians. Constantine gave Sunday civil prominence, and later church legislation helped move Christian rest practices increasingly towards Sunday. You don't have to distort one piece of evidence to defend another. That's the purpose of a biblical investigation. Not to force history into our theology, not to force scripture into our tradition, but to ask what the witness actually says. Because sometimes the truth is not found on either side of the argument. Sometimes the truth is found by slowing down long enough to distinguish the questions. So the next time someone tells you Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday, you now know there is a much bigger story, and the evidence tells that this story has stages and phases. Listen, my name is Reginald Delman Thompson. I'm a convergence leader and theological educator. For nearly 30 years, I've committed myself to biblical study, apostolic infrastructure, church history, and exegetical teaching rooted in Scripture. I want to thank you for joining me in another biblical investigation. And if this video helped you with your knowledge and history as well, knowledge and history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I will talk to you down low in the comments. God bless you. May heaven smile upon you. Peace, peace.